For Session Update, I'm Shannon Lurkey. Governor Mark Dayton released his supplemental budget reflecting the dip in state surplus to $900 million. His proposal includes $202 million for reserves, $117 million for tax reductions, $100 million for broadband development in Greater Minnesota, $100 million for equity and opportunity initiatives to curb racial disparities, $77 million for education and early learning, and $56 million for higher education. Here's that press conference from earlier today.
Lieutenant Governor Smith and I are proposing a fiscally responsible supplemental budget that would protect our state government's fiscal integrity while making critical investments in a state that is better for all Minnesotans. Our supplemental budget prioritizes tax cuts for middle-income families and investments in Minnesota's children, families, and communities. When I took office in 2011, our state government faced a projected $6 billion budget deficit, following a decade of deficits. The Lieutenant Governor and I are committed to ensuring that our state does not fall back into that same fiscal mess. Our supplemental budget would leave $571 million of projected surpluses unspent and unobligated at the end of the next biennium. Combined with a budgeted reserve fund of $1.6 billion, we would provide over $2 billion of protection from a future national economic downturn. We are proposing tax cuts for over 400,000 Minnesota families by increasing the child care tax credit and adopting federal conformity. Our proposal would reduce taxes on middle-income Minnesotans rather than providing more tax breaks to big businesses and the wealthiest citizens. Lieutenant Governor Smith and I are proposing smart new investments in Minnesota's children, families, and communities to help narrow our state's achievement gap, ensure more young children are ready for kindergarten, and save working parents tens of thousands of dollars on their child care costs. We propose a $25 million investment to move Minnesota closer to voluntary pre-kindergarten for all 4-year-olds everywhere in our state. Our plan would make quality, affordable pre-K available to 3,700 more Minnesota 4-year-olds. We're also proposing increased funding for family home visits, teacher workforce training, low-income child care assistance, and other early childhood initiatives. We propose spending $100 million for new initiatives to expand economic opportunities and eliminate economic disparities for Minnesotans of color across our state. It would help more Minnesotans gain access to opportunities in our state's growing economy and help minority entrepreneurs start and grow their businesses. We have detailed certain of our ideas. However, we have intentionally left considerable room in the $100 million for legislators and involve community groups to engage in an inclusive process which would find and fund the best new initiatives statewide. We're also proposing investments to improve our economy everywhere, but especially in Greater Minnesota, including the comprehensive transportation funding solution we outlined last year, essential new investments in infrastructure and water quality through our earlier bonding recommendations, $100 million for rural broadband expansion, and critical relief for unemployed steelworkers on the Iron Range now and without any attachments. We stand ready to work with legislators of both parties to enact a supplemental budget that is fiscally responsible, reduces taxes on middle-income Minnesotans, and also makes important investments in our state's children and our future. I'll ask Commissioner Franz to provide a little more detail, and then we'll open it up for questions. Commissioner.
Thank you, Governor. As the Governor mentioned, the values behind this budget, I want to talk a little bit about the math. So for those of you who have the handout, there's a one-page supplemental budget recommendation handout that shows the amount of money, that the available balance at the top of $900 million balance available for this biennium and $1.1 billion for the next biennium. What I'd like to point out on that chart are a couple of things that we've been talking about, and that are issues that support our structural balance approach to this budget. You'll notice that there are a number of items that have spending. For example, the broadband spending of $100 million in this biennium has a zero attached to it the next biennium. This is a recognition of the fact that we need to engage in some one-time spending versus ongoing spending. If you add up all the one-time spending in this budget, you will see that we have one-time spending of $411 million this budget cycle, as opposed to 287 ongoing spending. That gets you to the total of $698 million of spending for this biennium, leaving $202 million on the bottom line for this biennium. And in the next biennium, the governor recommendations leaves another $369 million on the bottom line, which gets us to $571 million on the bottom line after the end of this biennium and the next. One of the issues that we've talked a lot about in terms of the structural balance and the sound fiscal management that we've been engaged in for the last number of years, and that is to make sure that we provide a cushion or an opportunity if in fact we need that in the future. We're going to leave $571 million on the bottom line. We have a $1.6 billion reserve, at this time the highest we've ever had in this state. We also have a $351 million cash account. That's about $2.5 billion available for needs in the future. The other part of the budget process that we've gone through is to make sure that we've engaged in those priorities and those essential spending elements that are absolutely necessary for the last year of this biennium. Clearly, we'll be putting together a long-term biennial budget for this next year, but today, in this budget, we wanted to focus on those items that needed to be done today and to move forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to any questions.
You know, Jim Scholler wouldn't let me count the cash flow account, part of so.
I know, but I like
your math better. Yeah. We're available for questions on this subject, and Lieutenant Governor, particularly in the early childhood learning part, which he's spearheaded. And
Governor, do I understand this correctly? So the $571 million left unspent is that's from the projected surplus over the next 4 years, not from the $900 million available in the current
the
budget.
next the next 4 years, including this year. So the next two biennium.
Is it leaving $202 million unspent in this biennium?
At the end of this biennium, correct.
And why do you think that was important to leave some of that available?
Well, I was at the National Governors Association conference just a couple weeks ago, and 5 leading economists all predicted the strong likelihood of a national recession by calendar 2018. Now, nobody knows that with any certainty, but I think it's really important that we start to protect our state government's fiscal integrity from a future national economic downturn. That wasn't done in the past, and we saw the catastrophic consequences of that with ongoing deficits and budget shifts, borrowing from the schools and the like. So I want to do everything possible to see that my successor and the people of Minnesota are protected from that kind of a recurrence.
Governor, are you flexible on that number, or is that the linchpin to keeping this?
I'm flexible on all of it, but I'm not flexible on the principle that we need to be very cautious in what we obligate with tax cuts and spending increases for this year and for this fiscal, this biennium and the next biennium, so that we have that protection.
How much did you wrestle with that fiscal responsibility piece versus early childhood education? Last year, you had a massive proposal for early childhood with great big tails, and you've dialed that back considerably.
Well, the revised forecast really is a warning shot across all of our bowels, the legislature and mine. I mean, the reduction of a third of the forecasted surplus for this biennium and 42% of the forecasted surplus for the next biennium. I mean, fortunately, we still have strong surpluses as a result of the fiscal policy we enacted previously. And then, as I said, when I went to the NGA meeting and you know, what was that joke, you know, nation's economists have predicted 12 of the last 5 recessions. So, I mean, you know, you can, but they were unusually emphatic about the strong likelihood. So I took that very seriously as well. And I just, again, I went through the nightmare coming in here with a $6 billion projected deficit and having to go through all that in 2011. I don't want to repeat that, and I don't want my successor or the people of Minnesota to have to repeat that.
But you said that early childhood education is one of the linchpins of what you want to do in your time left. You've had to delay that.
Well, I've had to delay it, and I've had to condition it on the economic forecast a year from now. And if the resources are available, we have that greater degree of economic certainty, I will absolutely make it my top priority and press for it. I mean, I can, you know, but you know, as Commissioner Franz said we really had to look seriously at the so-called tails, the impact of any additional spending in the next biennium. And universal pre-K really has, relatively small impact in this biennium because it takes time for schools to gear up. But if we had the kind of 99.6% participation, which we have for all-day kindergarten, and which I hope we'd have for pre-K, it would be, I can't remember, but it's several $100 million. Margaret, we can give you the detail, but it's a very significant fiscal impact in the next biennium.
The program that you have here now, is that a new program, voluntary pre-kindergarten, or is that a continuation of the program we used to call school readiness?
Well, it's pre-kindergarten. It's in the schools. It's a beginning of what it would be, and how we work this out. But it would be in the formula. It would be, obviously it's capped, so we'd have to focus on schools that have that need. We'd focus on schools that are in low-income areas. We'd focus on schools that don't have parent-aware 3- and 4-star rated child care facilities, particularly in Greater Minnesota. But it would be along with the same approach that we would be using if it were universal.
Governor, speaking of
You wanna
child,
add to that?
that's
He's my expert on early childhood here, and you can highlight what else we're doing.
I would just say that, sometimes you can make progress in big, giant steps, and sometimes you have to make progress in slow, steady, incremental steps. And what we are doing with this budget for preschool is to make some incremental steps towards preschool for all 4-year-olds and their families who want it. And I think it'll be interesting to see how, we heard a lot last year about how school districts and parents don't want this. I think what we're going to see here is that a lot of schools and a lot of parents want this. And I think that'll help guide our decision making next year when we have the biennial budget.
So does school readiness continue as a parallel program?
Correct.
Or is that?
Yes.
How do you pick the schools to participate? I mean, the governor mentioned some characteristics, but I mean, is this a grant program? You have to apply, or?
Yep, what we're proposing is that districts could apply to the Department of Education. Their applications would be assessed based on factors like the number of 3- and 4-star rated preschool programs in their area, and also the percentage of poverty. School districts could apply for the entire district or just for one school, for example. And also we want to set it up so that the dollars don't get, because the dollars are somewhat limited, that they don't get gobbled up by one school or one part of the state. So we're saying that a certain percentages have to be shared between Greater Minnesota, the suburbs, and the core cities.
One of the, I would emphasize, this is I think you said it well. So it's a step forward toward my stated goal, and still one of my very top priorities of universal pre-K on a voluntary basis. And I won't be satisfied until we reach that point, and I hope very much it'll be in the next budget year, calendar 2017 session, that we'll be able to enact this statewide if our economic forecast permits.
Governor, on childcare, I think this is a new idea, having a childcare complex at the Capitol. Tell us the impetus behind this.
We have a lot of staff. The legislature has a lot of staff, agencies, and legislators themselves have a lot of young children, and I just think it's an idea whose time is overdue, and it'll create a better quality working environment. Parents can be sure they can go make contact with their children during their working hours. It'll help us attract and retain the best possible people. So I'm really serious about it, and I hope the legislature will adopt it.
One of the complaints that on all-day K and pre-K has been a lot of schools don't have the space. Do you have money somewhere in the budget to help schools expand so they can take part in this?
Well, that's a very good point, and that's really one of Commissioner Casilius's priorities, which again we couldn't squeeze into this, but I think one of the if we show that we're committed to providing for voluntary pre-K, we'll give a signal to school districts that they need to take the steps necessary to develop the space to accommodate that. I think a school, frankly, a school we refrained in the past from providing capital assistance to school districts, including those who were wiped out in floods and the like, because you just open that door and it's going to be a flood. So I mean, you know, I think we're signaling to schools, districts who did expand, found the space available for all-day kindergarten, and some of them really went up to their physical capacity, that you know, this is something that's is going to happen in Minnesota, and you know, you need to factor that into your capital requests or whatever's necessary.
Doesn't that hurt the small schools that can't go out and spend more money? But
Well-
like, you're talking about aiming this at some poverty areas, those might be some areas that
You know,
can't afford it.
it's a very valid point, and you know, we'll learn as we go from this. I mean, this is not another reason why maybe some people say it's better to have it not take effect all at once as kindergarten did. And you know, we'll work with the school districts if they come back, and we'll work with the legislature, obviously, in this session, and even more so the next session, to see what is necessary to accommodate all the children, all the parents who want to take advantage of this opportunity.
Do you expect the $1 for every $1 in tax relief for every $6 in spending to satisfy the Republicans who have made clear they want a bigger tax rate?
We have to ask them. Probably not.
Knowing that if there's
I
going to
came
be
in low because any reduction in taxes is ongoing. And in fact, it increases each year, and it increases significantly in the next biennium, because we're talking about tax reduction. This is really about, what is it, 6 months of this biennium. Anything we put in place, you know, by the time it pays part of next year's income taxes is paid by people. So the tail on any kind of tax reduction, the fiscal consequence in revenue reduction in the following biennium and then the following biennium is really enormous, and that's why, you know, we need to be very cautious. The folks who say, well, you know, this is going to generate more revenue than it costs, just haven't faced the reality of what happened to the federal government when they provided massive tax cuts back in the early 80s and threw us into these massive deficits. They hadn't looked at what happened in Minnesota when there were tax cuts in 2000, 2001, did not stimulate additional economic growth, put us on a fiscal precipice, and then with the Great Recession, we fell over the cliff. So, I mean, those who don't learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat its mistakes, and that's just, you know, I was restrained in that. I had other proposals in mind, and I just said, you know, we're not going to sacrifice the fiscal integrity of this state on tax giveaways or excessive spending. Much as I'd like to provide additional tax cuts and additional spending investments, you got some people here with the 5%. You know, I note that we are providing in a different way about the same amount of money for increased incomes for child care, personal care attendants through the conforming to the federal requirement in terms of overtime. It's about $18 million this biennium, and was it 40 million the next biennium. So, you know, we did it that way. But I'm sympathetic to those who, you know, make that kind of commitment and deserve to be better paid for their work.
Were there any other spending priorities in your budget that were scaled back because of your concern over future economic downturn?
Pre-kindergarten, first and foremost.
Were there any other areas of your
It's
budget?
not all of them. I mean, we left a lot of them out that had ongoing costs. You know, we really had the things that I felt we had to do. We have an MFIP increase; it's ongoing. We have funding for Department of Human Services for especially for Anoka and for St. Peter, which is just staffing increases and other programmatic improvements, which I think are just critical to those entities, as well as corrections, additional corrections personnel, staffing, and security, and also a very expensive program, but one I really think we're morally and actually I think we'll be legally bound to do, which is provide a HIV vaccine, hepatitis vaccine, to patients, which is, what's the cost? I mean, it's $5 million this year and significantly more next year. So things like that are not going to be. I'd rather spend money on other priorities, but these are just urgent and absolutely necessary priorities. I hope the legislature will recognize them as such.
I don't detect in your budget any response to the request that's been heard at the Capitol this year for another 5% increase for personal care attendants, for those who do disabled care. Did you consider that at all? And is it here that I've overlooked it?
No, it's not in there, but as I said, the increase which will go to child care, personal care attendants, is through reducing the amount of time they need to qualify for overtime, and then the payments there, which is $18 million in this biennium, and what, $40 million in the next biennium, which is $58 million, which is very close to what the total cost of the 5% would be. So it's another way of providing significant income increases.
Could you, at the Lieutenant Governor, talk about the $100 million for broadband? Even advocates of broadband say that's a huge amount of money, and it's 10 times what the state has spent in some recent years.
Well,
How exactly would this be played out? How would you distribute this? How would you achieve not raising the rates for creating broadband all across the state? Would it be a 1-year program, a 2-year program?
It's 10% more than a grossly inadequate amount of money that was provided in the last legislative session by the House Republicans, and if it hadn't been for the Senate, it would have been nothing at all. And then they go around and tell all their constituents, well, apply for broadband. We provided $10 million for broadband, when they know that's grossly inadequate for the scope of the need. It's $10 million one time. It doesn't have to all be spent in this this biennium. It carries forward, and we'll see, how far it goes and what's necessary. But you talk about equal opportunity in Greater Minnesota. Broadband is just essential. As I had excellent testimony in my State of the State from a woman who lives on a farm in Belle Plaine, and whose livelihood depends on high-speed internet access. She doesn't have high speed, at least she has access. And you go over Greater Minnesota, and you find one piece of one pocket has broadband access, and next to it, a few miles away, it has none at all. So all the lip service given to the needs of Greater Minnesota better be backed up with some really serious money for broadband expansion.
So the money would be spent this year, but could be allocated this year, but spent over multiple years?
Carry forward, yes.
Do you know how many years you would envision this?
Well, this is for the next, this biennium and next biennium. If they come back in the next session or the session following, say we've spent it all well, and more is necessary, we can consider that at that time. But I think we need to put our money where our rhetoric is about broadband, and especially is providing Greater Minnesota with the equality of opportunities that people in the metropolitan area. There are areas in the metropolitan area that don't have broadband access, but there's just whole areas of Greater Minnesota which are seriously economically disadvantaged because individuals who want to work out of their home, or businesses that want to work in these communities can't have access as most people have here in the metropolitan area and depend upon.
Do you have any idea of how many people would be able to access this, or how many communities?
I don't.
Lieutenant Governor's trying to push you out of the way.
Okay, good.
I would never do that.
Thanks for pointing it out.
We estimate there are about 244,000 Minnesotans that don't have access to broadband, and this grant would take us a good way towards addressing that, but it wouldn't get us all the way there. The governor's broadband task force estimates that the total cost of trying to achieve our stated state goals on access and speed is more like $3 billion. And I want to just note also that the way this grant program works is the state investment leverages at least that much again in local and private provider dollars. So every dollar that we invest in this broadband program is getting at least another dollar or $1.50 to expand the whole program. And the governor's broadband task force recommended that we spend $200 million this biennium. So we are not overdoing it, I don't think.
Don't leave.
Well, following up on that, if you reach the 244,000 or a good number of them, isn't technology going to change and you have to start all over doing something new that you may not even know what it is today?
I only hear the argument about technology changing coming from people who already have access to broadband. People who don't have access are not saying, I want to sit around and wait for the latest and greatest technology. Technology always changes. Technology will never stop changing, and we shouldn't wait to make these investments while we're holding off on technology changing. The federal CAF dollars are also going to be really helpful in allowing us to reach our goal, too.
Same framework that the current program
Correct.
is, with the same requirements and the same rules and the same standards?
It would-
academic and?
I think I know what you're asking about. We are funding the existing program that we have. However, I'm well aware that there's lots of conversations happening at the legislature about whether the criteria for that program need to be addressed in some way, and I think that both the governor and I would be open to those conversations. The key thing, though, is we're trying to get broadband access to places where there is no broadband access.
And we have an excellent executive director who's from Cook County, so she knows firsthand the challenges in greater Minnesota.
Can I get in
Yeah,
here too? Just one clarification on the early childhood education facilities. There's $20 million in the bonding bill released on January 15th, specifically allocated to early childhood facilities. Some of that's cash and some of that's bonding.
I'm leaving. You guys, you two,
And that would be pre-K and all-day K, each either one?
On the broadband, the broadband task force report estimated in terms of the overall need to get to 100% connectivity in the state, it gave a range of 900 million to I think up to 3 billion to fully fund that need. I mean, 100 million for broadband in this proposal is a drop in the bucket. I mean, how do you?
So we have both a drop in the bucket, and is it too much? So maybe we're hitting. I mean, I understand what you're saying, Ricardo. I think also that we think that I think last year it was 10 million, so we're doing 10 times as much. We think that we can accomplish a lot and get access to a lot of people with 100 million, and then take it from there.
It's not a lot of money, but there's yet another healthcare financing study as part of this, and this one would look at how to move the state to a single-payer universal healthcare system. Is that something that you're sizing up and teeing up for next year?
well, I think it's been proposed for a long time. I, in principle, have been in favor of single payer for 20 years. MNsure has educated me about the enormous complexities of shifting healthcare, and I think this study you should assess that. So it's trying to take a reasoned and dispassionate look at a subject that a lot of people believe in, which parenthetically one of our presidential candidates espouses and gets enormous positive response to. But we'll look and see if what practical. It was Vermont at one point was going to pioneer this, and we talk about the states being laboratories of social change, and they backed off of it for reasons I don't fully, I just don't know. But I think the difficulty of one state doing it, but this will look at it.
What does this study say about your current views on the state of Minnesota healthcare with MNsure and the different public programs that are available?
Well, as I understand it, it said that despite the problems with MNsure, they don't see a viable alternative. And the problems of the national equivalent that I think 36 or so states are part of are similar to Minnesota Care and at a vastly larger scale because of the number of people that are in it. So this notion that anywhere you've been able to make this incredible conversion to provide what people are looking for, and also your point that we have 3 different programs in Minnesota. We have the Minnesota Care, we have Medicaid, and we have the MNsure, and we have a group of people who are very transient, who have some variety of needs, variety of changing income situations, as I said, a variety of locations, eligibility. I mean, it's a phenomenally complicated process to understand who they are, where they are, what their situation is, and then it changes. So I'm not excusing any of the 3, but it's easy for the critics to whack at them. What they need to know is we got a lot of really dedicated people working, all the time at Minute and DHS and MNsure to do their very utmost to resolve this and make it as near perfect as it should be. And we've made considerable progress, and we're not there yet. You want to add anything to that?
Cybersecurity comes up in this a few times. Do you have, as they say in Washington, a specific threat? Is there something specific that you're after here? Why is it emphasis on that?
There are literally millions of threats every day. attempts to hack into one of the various state systems, and somebody can elaborate. But General Nash can provide detail, and Commissioner Baden, and they will provide that detail to the legislature. And this is again just not a complete ask in terms of the scope of the need, but we're so far behind and we're so vulnerable, and you know, even with the best of these advances, and you're again, the technology will continue to advance, and the technology of the people who are the criminals who are accessing these will continue to advance. It'll have to be ongoing, but we've got a lot of catching up to do.
What would the complete ask be?
We have a number, one of the if you'll see on the chart, we've got an ask of $46 million of one-time money, but there's also an ask by the University of Minnesota, and one of the things we're recommending being supported for them is another $19 million in cybersecurity upgrades. So this would be the first investment in this infrastructure, in this kind of an investment in a long time. This is another one of the infrastructure issues that has not been addressed recently, and so this is a part of a bigger package.
But in answer, I mean, there would be an ask next year. We're just, we're not making commitments that we don't know whether we can keep. So this is a big step forward, but it's not the end of what needs to be done. And we have agencies. We've been doing this for 5 years. Agencies that are just so far and behind and just really antiquated, just basic computer systems that don't have the capacity they need, don't have the ability to interact with one another. And we've been putting money into agency budget requests every year for 5 years now. We got a couple more this time, although we again had to curtail that. It's one of the reductions we had to do. But we're just, we just came in and we're just woefully far behind.
I may have missed it, but I don't think this supplemental includes funding for implementation of Real ID. Isn't that going to be a significant cost to the state?
Well, we don't know.
But it's not going to be free.
It won't be free, but it won't happen until we get the legislature to, first of all, lift the lid so we can have the Department of Public Safety make that assessment. And they can't even agree on just simply lifting the prohibition from DPS, making that kind of assessment, talking to the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, a couple of things like the 26-week unemployment benefits for unemployed workers on the range, and just lifting the prohibition on Real ID, which we're supposed to be taking care of in the first week. Now we're in the second week, and they're showing very little progress because of all this other stuff that gets added on, all the political games that are being played with them. So if they want to give us that, we can start to make an assessment, and maybe hopefully by the end of the session, come back with an assessment of what that will cost. But at this point, we don't have that capability.
Governor, do you see any way of moving forward significantly in this session on transportation? You've made your proposal, you said in your State of the State you want alternatives. The Republicans say they've already given you an alternative. Is there any way of proceeding from this point, sir?
Well, they want to shift at least $500 million of biennium from the general fund over to the transportation fund, and then they want to give $2 billion in tax cuts. I mean, that blows even these budgets, the forecasts, totally into deficit, and it really, again, the future the consequences in future biennia are even greater. So, I mean, and I challenge them to give me a real, honest budget on all accounts. I mean, here's my overview. I'd like to see their overview, which includes the transportation shifts that they want to make, as well as the tax cuts, as well as whatever else. Are they going to do nothing for broadband? So, until they provide a responsible budget to compare with mine, I really can't answer that question.
Governor, would perhaps them backing off on their tax cut requests and you dropping your tax increase request and talking about gas tax be a way out of this?
I'm open to any discussion, but I'm not going to negotiate here.
Last year, you set a minimum for certain types of spending. Education put us into a special session. Is there anything in this budget where you're not willing to be flexible? Is there any minimums here that you absolutely have to see in a final agreement?
Well, last year was different. It was a budget year. We had to have a budget to proceed. It's the same thing, we had in those years. This we could, you could do nothing and add, what would be 2.5 billion to the, 2.1 billion to the bottom line at the end of the next biennium. I don't think that's advisable. I don't think it's wise, but there's nothing here that absolutely, well, I should qualify that. Nothing that has to be done in terms of the budget integrity, in terms of dollars balancing the budget. But DHS, the two security hospitals at Anoka and St. Peter, corrections, I mean, those are just absolutely imperative in order to provide for public security, public safety, as well as the safety of the people who work those jobs. So there are some that would just, I would argue, have to be done, and others that absolutely should be done, like everything else.
How about to get a deal with House Republicans and the Senate? Anything in particular in here that you?
I'm not going to start negotiating here.
Governor, your approach on this equity agenda with $100 million in one-time funding, much of it to be allocated, looks like with grants of some sort. That's a bit unusual. Could you say why you chose to approach that agenda in this way? And on that, the long list of how you've used that money, proposed to use that money, what are the best bets? What's your priority on that list?
My priority is the process. My priority is to involve 201 legislators who have expertise about what's needed in their respective districts. And there's really almost no area of the state that's not affected by these racial economic disparities. So, 201 legislators, all the community groups that have been involved that would like to get further involved. I think, they had one hearing in the legislature on the subject before, when they're considering the special session, it was 6 hours of testimony. So people want to be involved, they want to be engaged, and I want that process to produce the best possible outcome. So I thought it was proper for us to put forward some specific ideas. We have them, we have others, but it's much more important that everyone else be engaged.
Anything else on this topic?
Governor, you talked about the importance of protecting the state's, fiscal integrity. Why not take the 202 million left on the bottom line and put that into the budget reserve so it's not left at hag clover?
Well, we put, what was it, 600 million into the budget reserve last November. I mean, it's not, it's not locked up in the sense that it's not, it could be accessed, but that'll be another debate for another year if and when it becomes necessary. And it probably will at some point if we go through another serious recession. I mean, these numbers are big, but relative to the shift in as the last forecast 3 months later showed, these changes in the economic assumptions or a change in the economic realities have, multi-$100 million impacts on the state budget situation. So I think you should have the flexibility for the next biennium. I mean, we're still, 15 months from even beginning it, and so therefore, 33 months away from, 15 plus 24. I used to be good at this. 39 months away from concluding it, and I think we deserve that flexibility.
You were talking about the unemployment extension. Have you talked to Speaker Dowd?
I have breakfast with the Republican leadership tomorrow. I've talked to him just parenthetically, on the side, but it doesn't qualify as a serious conversation. But Senator Box had serious conversations with him, and it's really for them to. I've made my position very clear. I remember his saying they were going to take care of. They didn't need a special session because they were going to take care of this the very first week of the legislative session. Well, that was understood to be by me, and I think by most others, to be 26 weeks. That he wasn't specific on that, in fairness, but unemployment benefits the first week, it wasn't going to be tied to 10 times more business tax cuts. And if they're going to play that kind of political game with every single one of these things, Real ID and everything else that follows, it's going to be a session that will accomplish nothing. And people want a divided government in Minnesota. Well, this is a case study right here, going on before your eyes, and we'll see. We'll see what's possible. I'll do my best to influence it, but it's 201 legislators' responsibility to work these things out and do it responsibly, and, you know, we're not off to a very promising start.
Governor,
On the case of the House Republicans, I don't mean to include everybody, but it takes 2 to 3 to tango, and, you know, I mean, I just think I'm appalled at what the House Republicans are doing with the unemployment benefits for people who are desperate and need them, and were promised them by the House Speaker, and now they're trying to use that to leverage, you know, $291 million in unemployment business tax cuts. And I said in my State of the State, I will support some measure of that. It ought to go through the regular committee process, both the House and the Senate, look at the consequences of it. They just, you know, trying to ram this thing through and hold people who are out of money hostage to that agenda, and I think it's shameful.
Governor, on your equity agenda, 33 million is left to be determined with input by some of the various communities. Do you risk having nothing done there because the proposals at this point are still being developed? I mean, we've got a shortened session and a lot of priorities that are kind of taking shape. I mean, with it still being developed at this point.
Well, there's $100 million available. I mean, I recommend the legislature disposes. So, I mean, I'm totally flexible. I thought I wanted to put forward some specific ideas, so that people wouldn't say, well, you don't have any idea what you're talking about. That's just, you know, the rap I got for the session. Now they'll say I'm committing too much of it, so I'll get that rap, so choose your rap. But, you know, I'm wide open to better ideas for all 100 million. I just think the process of engaging, you know, people all over the state who are care and concern and have the expertise about what we need to do to reduce racial economic disparities is that will produce the best result. And that's what I want to encourage as strongly as possible.
Back in the November forecast, you had said the gas tax was dead, ceding to political realities. You brought it back up. Do you think the political reality has changed, or do you regret saying it was dead?
No, it was my political assessment at the time, and, you know, subject to change certainly. You know, one thing that's changed is we don't have the kind of, you know, surpluses in the general fund for this biennium and the next biennium, which make it seem, you know, much easier to transfer $500 million a biennium, and actually be more in subsequent biennia over to the transportation fund. I mean, that, and to do, you know, even what the Republicans say they want to do with tax cuts and the like, I mean, it just busts the whole budget wide open. So I think it does, that definitely has changed. How they're going to respond to that remains to be seen. But again, I will strongly insist upon a transportation proposal that's at least 10, I say 10 years, but multi-year, that has real money, committed money, reliable money, and enough money to really make it this kind of difference. We have a $6 billion estimate what it's going to cost over the next 10 years to maintain our existing transportation infrastructure and to make some very modest improvements. This is not the platinum plan by any means at all. This is what we need to do so things don't get worse in Minnesota, our highways, our bridges, our roads, and public transit. And the people who want to just, you know, put their head in the sand and ignore that are just going to imperil the state citizens and businesses and our economic and social future. And I think that would be extremely irresponsible.
So, Governor, if there's not a 10-year plan, would no plan be a better option?
No, multi-year, but not a 1 year or 2 year fix. We did that before. We've done it at least twice since I've been around here. You know, they had a surplus 1 year back in the 80s. So they put, I don't know, 300 million or so into transportation, additional transportation money one time. And what you hear from the people in the industry is, you know, they'll spend that money, but it doesn't, they're not going to make the investments in additional machinery and additional work crews. And it has to be something that they can rely on over a period of time. 10 years doesn't have to be, but it should be, because, you know, it's going to need to be ongoing beyond that if we're going to make this state viable for the people who are going to live here and the businesses who want to locate and grow here. If we have a clogged transportation system, I guarantee you businesses are going to go somewhere where they aren't, and where they can expand, get their products to markets, and where their employees can get to and from work, and where they're so.
Pretty good.
Okay.
Governor, back to the Iron Range unemployment benefits. Would you sign a bill similar to what the House Ways and Means approved yesterday?
I'll sign it. I'm not going to, you know, the Senate and the House need to work it out, and they send me a bill that's got 26 weeks of unemployment benefits for retroactive for people up on the Iron Range, I'll swallow what else they agree to and sign the bill.
Even if it has that, the other
I'll
provisions?
sign what they agree to and I'll sign what they agree to. It's got to include 26 weeks retroactive for everybody up there who's affected.
Governor, you're saying that if it has the business tax and the unemployment trust fund changes in that very same bill, you'd sign it as long as the House and the Senate agree to it?
Well, I have to, the House and Senate have to agree to it before I sign it. So, I mean, that's a given. I mean, again, there'll be, if there's things in there I don't like, if it has what I've just described, 26 weeks retroactive unemployment benefits for all the people affected up there, you know, and the House and Senate agree to whatever else is in there, I'll sign whatever else is necessary to get it done. Unless, and the emphasis on get it done. Get it done now. This is just really shameful and unnecessary and ridiculous.
Well, Governor, if I may, if you would sign the bill even if it had the business tax cuts in it, then isn't some of the blame with Senate Democrats?
Well, I'm not going to get into negotiating here, and I'm not going to get into signing. Right now, the blame goes on the House Republicans who won't pass the unemployment part of it, and we'll take it from there. We'll see.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.